good time. I feel alive, and the world turning inside out. Yeah. I'm floating around in ecstasy, so don't stop me now. Don't stop me, 'cause I'm having a good time, having a good time. I'm a shooting star leaping through the sky like a tiger, defying the laws of gravity. I'm a racing car passing by like Lady Godiva. I'm gonna go, go, go. There's no stopping me. I'm burning through the sky, yeah. 200 degrees, that's why they call me Mr. Fahrenheit. I'm traveling at the speed of light. I wanna make a supersonic man out of you. Don't stop me now. I'm having such a good time. I'm having a ball. Don't stop me now. If you wanna have a good time, just give me a call. Don't stop me now. I'm having a good time. Don't stop me. Yes, I'm having a good time. I don't wanna stop at all. Yeah. I'm a rocket ship on my way to Mars on a collision course. I am a satellite. I'm out of control. I'm a sex machine ready to reload like an atom bomb about to explode. I'm burning through the sky, yeah. 200 degrees, that's why they call me Mr. Fahrenheit. I'm traveling at the speed of light. I wanna make a supersonic woman of you. Don't stop me, don't stop me, don't stop me. Hey, hey, hey! Don't stop me, don't stop me. Ooh, ooh, ooh. I like it. Don't stop me, have a good time, good time. Don't stop me, don't stop me.
All right, we are here, right? Week 2, lecture 3. Hope you guys all had a good weekend. Watching the chat here. Moving over to the Q&A though, while I'm lecturing. I sent out a little message yesterday, just kind of reminding you guys of what's ahead. I saw just a ton of great answers, ton of great responses on the discussion section activity. That was due, I guess, last night, right at midnight. So every Monday. Starting this week, I'm going to release a quiz on Thursday. So not today, but on Thursday. And that'll be due a week from today before lecture. So we'll get into a rhythm. Discussion activities every week. That'll be released later today. So that's all on the screen here, right here. All right. So have that in your agenda. And like I said, that'll start to really make sure that that we get just kind of we stay on pace. Make sure that we're not getting too far behind or too far out of touch with the material, and get us ready for that midterm. So question just came up. Just to clarify, the problem sets aren't for points, but rather they are questions that will be on the exam. So yeah, the discussion section questions in class or in your discussion sections, those are difficult questions. So you're gonna want to really take those questions as an opportunity to push yourself on the material. But it's going to be those practice questions, those multiple choice practice questions that are going to be used to create those quizzes. So that's what the setup will be. And like I said, a lot will come to light after Thursday when you see that first lecture quiz and you say, this is that conversion from the material in class and the questions to the actual lecture quiz. And so will the midterm be multiple choice? Yes. So we're going to make this multiple choice. It's going to be, I'll talk about it later. I think it's 25 or 30 questions, more than enough time. In terms of where the multiple choice practice questions are, let me show you where that is here on Top Hat. You guys can see my screen here. I've got discussion section activities. That'll keep being updated. We've got the weekly discussion section questions that your TAs will go through. And here we have practice problems. So right here, this is going to be a good mimic of what that lecture quiz is going to look like, the questions on the lecture quiz. So take a look at those and let those guide you. As well as the textbook. The textbook questions have some questions that'll look similar as well. So that's a great question. And again, you guys will see it. It'll become more comfortable after this week. So okay, so let's get started for the day, because the one thing that we did last class that I don't know if it's bad or good. It just is the nature of some of these classes, is sometimes we just kind of stop halfway through a thought. And last class we stopped kind of right as we introduced this quantity supplied. So we had gotten this quantity supplied defined. We kind of talked about digging for gasoline, but we didn't really take it a step further. So we just defined it as the amount a firm is willing and able to produce at a given price level, right? That was kind of the last thing we defined in class on Thursday. And it's really important for me to make sure that we just take one half step back at the start of every lecture to make sure everybody's on the same page as we move forward. So, and with that in mind, if you have questions, I'm not shutting down the chat. I'm just not looking at the chat. I'm doing on, if you have a question, bring it up on the Q&A and I'll make sure I address it. So, so last class, yeah, quantity supplied is the amount a firm is willing and able to produce at a given price level. Now, in addition to just having that definition, we're going to follow kind of the same pattern we did with demand and say, well, in order to do something with this, we can't just sit here and talk about it or define it. We need some more information. So what we need is we need a supply schedule, right? Just like we had a demand schedule, we need a supply schedule that's going to tell us what those combinations of price and quantity supplied are. And so I've got all the numbers up there right now, but you can imagine telling a story that's consistent with how we ended class last week and say, you know, if the price of gasoline is $1, right, if that's what the price is, how much are firms willing and able to produce? Well, and again, think about them digging into the ground and having to go get all those, get that gasoline, get that oil, right? How much are they willing to produce? I've got it as 0. Right. And I often ask out loud in class, like, hey, why would this be the case? Right. And you can think, geez, a firm's not going to just, go through all these regulations, through all these things, and then only get $1 back of gasoline or $1.50. I've got it there too. Their quantity supplied is going to be 0. People might want to buy it, but there's not going to be any firms producing it. When that price goes up to $2, I've got the number as 4, right? So you imagine 4 gallons of gasoline are supplied. And then it goes up by 4 for every 50-cent increase in price that we have. So you can imagine again that we've got this firm that's sitting here looking at the prices saying, price is going up, I'm going to be willing to dig a little bit further, right? And because that price is high, I'm going to get enough revenue that I'm able to fund that digging as well. So we see that positive relationship between price and quantity. And all we really want to do with this table right here, with this supply schedule, is we want to visualize, right? We want to visualize the data, right, in a graph form, right? And so I'm going to just pick 2 points. And again, this should feel comfortable given what we went through last week, right? But you could imagine that we've got $2 right here. And at $2, there's a quantity supplied of 4. And we'll just call that point C. And then when that price goes up to $3, right, we move along a line and we've got 12 gallons of gasoline that are being produced, right, by a firm. And we could go ahead and actually, right here is our first point. So I can make this straight. There we go. Got to start off the week well. There we go. Big dots get us on our line. Excuse me. So we've got this positive relationship, this upward sloping curve, right, that's depicting this supply schedule. Okay. So what we've just done here is we've created a supply curve, which is all the combos of price and quantity supplied, right? And along with this, what we see is that, oh, a good question just came up. I really like this question. Are all supplier demand schedules, are those relationships linear? So the question would, what that's really suggesting is, or really asking about is, are we going to see this increase of 4, increase of 4, increase of 4 for every 50 cents? And when we were doing demand, it was a change of 2, I think, for every 50 cents. That's not necessary. I've just done it in this way just because it's easier to graph right now, but there's nothing that says that this needs to be linear. And when you go into the micro side of things, go a little bit deeper into the micro side of things, you'll see that it's a real function of how much does that next gallon cost to produce, right? That's going to really determine what that quantity relationship is going to be when price changes. So great question. I really like that. But we'll have a lot of our curves kind of changing from linear to non-linear depending on the situation and depending on kind of how my wrist is feeling, I suppose. Now, another thing to notice here is that the law of supply pops out of this. And I've got this written kind of without much space, but that's kind of on purpose. I don't need a ton of space. Like I said, we can spend a lot of time talking about like the meaning of a law and why this is so relevant, but ultimately we should just keep in mind that when the price of a good or service rises, firms are going to be willing to supply more, right? They just say, look, if something's really, really valuable on the market and people are willing to pay a lot of money for it, we should be willing to produce a lot. That's all the law of supply is saying. Same thing as if we have the price go down, quantity supplied will also go down, right? So they just move in the same direction. They move together. They're a direct relationship between those two things. Okay, so we've got this supply curve, and again, I'm moving a little bit faster, only because we kind of saw it in the same way, kind of the converse of it, the other side of the market with demand. But the movement from going from the supply schedule to the supply curve should feel somewhat comfortable given what we went over last week. Okay, so what's next? All right, what's next? Let's make sure that we feel really good about this. I'm going to skip this market supply because it's less relevant right now. I want to know what happens to the supply curve when the price of a good increases. So a little bit of a similar feeling question as last week. Let's see what you guys have. It's good to kind of get a question rolling right off the bat. So what do we got here? And I'll check out the chat while we're answering. All right. We'll open this back up. About 5 more seconds. Yeah, classic song, right? Is this Western music or jazz? I don't really know. Yeah, this is like your 80s. You guys are like part of my childhood now, right? Because I grew up learning how to ice skate in like 1986. So here you go. All right. So before I get to the question on Top Hat, so even if a product is in high demand, but the company doesn't earn that much profit, they will continue to increase the supply. So this is a great question, and it's really digging into kind of the behavior and the decision-making process of firms. How do they actually decide how much to produce? And it has a lot to do with that marginal revenue, marginal cost. So if that cost is going up, right, they're going to have to increase that supply or increase that price to match that marginal cost. Conversely, if the price goes up, they'll be willing to increase their production and have that marginal cost rise, so that those two things are a little bit more equalized. So it's a good question. It's really Javier's got a great question here, but it's ultimately, I'm kicking it a little bit down the road because it's really a great micro related question, like Econ 3 week 8 question. But anyways, okay. So what do we got on the responses here? All right, what do we got on the responses? So we're a little split here, but I'm seeing a higher fraction of folks moving towards this do nothing, which I'm really, really happy to see, because this is still a tricky one. But what happens to supply, the entire supply curve, when the price changes, right? We just move along the curve, right? We don't change the curve entirely, right? So if we're, and again, what I want you guys to get used to, especially as we start moving towards quizzes and exams, is I want you just to almost become, it should be automatic that you draw the supply curve or draw the demand curve or draw the market. Even if you don't need to use it in the end, it's just nice to have yourself kind of centered, right? So what I'm asking here is I'm saying, look, if the price is P1 and the quantity supplied is Q1, and we're here at point A, right? If the price increases, all we're doing is we're moving to P2, right? The whole point of the supply curve is to tell us what that relationship is between the price and the quantity supply. That's all it's doing for us. So ultimately, we don't want that curve to change when the price changes, because that's the point of coming up with the supply curve. Okay, so we just move along that curve. So then that kind of begs the question, and you guys can kind of guess where this is headed, right? We're going to say, not if price moves us along the supply curve, what shifts or what changes the supply curve? So I'm going to ask you guys a top hat question about this, and we can go ahead and think about it in terms of the gasoline market, right? Or something like oil. Other than price, why would oil producers dig for more oil in a given month, right? So more generally, what would make a firm willing and able to produce more other than the price? Okay, so this is a written out question, so so give it a try, give it a go here, and see if we can come up with some good answers. All right, add a little bit more time here. Open this back up here. All right, 10 more seconds. Okay. All right, so all right, a couple questions came up, or I guess the question is favorite rock band. Gosh, I like so many bands, all kinds of music. The first concert I ever went to on my own was with my brother when I was 15, and it was a Rush concert. That was in 1997. Yeah, 1997. I was just shocked by how much sound 3 people could make. It was incredible. So okay, so let's go to this though. What's going to change the amount that oil producers dig for in a month, right? Other than price, right? What's gonna move this supply curve, essentially, is what we're asking, right? So we're asking this in like 6 different ways, right? And the reason I'm doing that is because I want you guys to be able to say, when the supply curve moves, It means all of these things. So demand comes up as a big answer all the time, and it turns out that demand is, so you're actually like 2 steps ahead, which is actually fine. It's not that it's, I don't want to say that it's necessarily wrong to think this way, but when we think about demand, demand is not, a change in demand will not shift the supply curve, right? The change in demand will not shift it. The change in demand will eventually change the price and the amount that firms produce, but that's not what's moving this supply curve. I really like this competition answer. We'll talk about kind of like future things a little bit, future prices maybe. Quantity, I meant to say weather. Weather is good. Weather is actually really good. War is really good. New technology, government can play a role. Future shortage can play a role. Competition, again, I really like that. Yes, something about the stock, reserves, this right here. So this, when it comes to broadening our thoughts and kind of broadening to going to other markets, this right here is really big, labor. Same with technological advancements. That's kind of an equally important issue. So these are all actually really, they're all really, each of them for the most part have their own validity. And a lot of competition in there that I see, and I really like that. And let's see what the word cloud gives us. We'll see that demand come up, and again, you're just a step ahead, but don't think of it as necessarily the wrong way of thinking. More just it's kind of one side of the market versus the other, and we'll make sure that we include it. So I see subsidies in there. That's fantastic. That's a very micro-based topic, and I really like that. Okay, so yes, great question that just came up. Could you explain how labor factors with supply? So actually, that is something that I want to focus on. Let's talk about all of these shifters. What is the biggest shifter of supply? And I find supply a little bit more difficult to grasp on a first pass, ultimately because we ourselves are more consumer-based than suppliers. We're not very few of us are like starting our own business right now, and some of us are, and it makes it a little bit easier. But for the most part, as a college student taking classes, we're not really into the supply side of things. But the biggest shifter that we're going to define as the biggest shifter is going to be the cost of inputs. Okay, so the cost of inputs are going to be our biggest shifter. Now, when we say inputs, we're going to keep our life kind of simple. I'm going to back this up. Sorry about that. Right, we're going to keep our life kind of simple right now and say, in order to produce gasoline, for example, right, we're going to need 2 things. We're going to need labor, and we're going to need capital. And when I say capital, what I mean is something like the machines. And so those of you who are talking about technology, we'll identify that separately, but at the same time, it'll be it's something that we can kind of wrap into this whole capital idea. Okay, so labor and capital are going to be our biggest inputs. So we would say that the cost of labor is going to have a direct influence on how much we supply, regardless of what the price of the good actually is, right? So let's see this actually be carried out. So the cost of labor, first of all, we can just define as wages. So if you think about this firm right here that we have mapped out on the left side of the screen here, right? If they have to start paying their workers more, let's say that the cost of labor increases, right? Well, what's going to happen? Well, now if we're looking at this Q1 right here, right? If we're looking at this Q1 right here, we were originally charging, right? Or the price was initially that much. But now, if we have to pay our workers more, gosh, that price has got to be a little bit higher, right? We've got to charge more for that particular unit. I'm off on my dot there, right there, right? So we've got to move it that way. Alternatively, we could just keep the price the same, but make fewer units, right? So both of those movements lead to this brand new supply curve right here. Right, we're going to move from supply 1 to supply 2, right, when we have this increase in the cost of production. right? So that's really what's going on here is this cost of labor increases. This leads to a higher cost of producing. We'll say higher cost to produce. And I can save myself there because I'm running out of space, right? So we got this higher cost to produce now, right? Kind of intuitively, that makes us think that we should supply less, like we should have this, we can tell a story of a decrease in supply. And that's exactly what this is. This is a decrease in supply. Now, remember, I kind of harped on that shifting to the right and left last class. And if you haven't taken econ before, you'd be like, he is really into this left-right thing. That's because right here, notice how supply is shifting left. We're producing less units for the same price. So we shift left. We don't want to think of up and down as the way we move because that kind of moves in opposition to this decrease in supply. So we would say this shift left is a decrease, right? So we decrease that supply, shift it to the left. So that's going to be our movement right there. So, yeah, it was great to see that question come right off the bat. Could you explain how labor factors with supply? And that's it. It's almost it's directly affecting it in the sense that if wages go up, it's more costly to produce. That's going to decrease supply. That's going to shift that thing to the left. Okay. Another question: would investors be an input too, or not really? Investors are a little bit different because these are decisions being made on the margin. What you're getting at potentially is fixed costs. So that's going to be, is there some amount of money that you need just to start a firm? And then you make these decisions on the margin, like so that maybe you have to pay your workers more or less over time, but that's going to lead to this shift in supply at that point, not necessarily when the investors are putting money in. That'll not change that short run decision. Good question though, because it's definitely part of the process when it comes to putting together producing units. So, okay, the other thing we want to talk about is the cost of capital, right? So let's, a couple questions came up here. So maybe too specific question, but how do government subsidies affect the curve, such as the soybean industry? I'm gonna come back to this because I have it as a kind of a different part of the slide, or a different slide will address that. That is a fantastic question. Another question that came up was, would a wage decrease make the curve shift right? Oh my gosh, you guys are 100% on it. That is 100% correct. And I'm going to try to act like I've been there before, but this is that's the type of stuff that makes my day, honestly. And I'll be talking about it all night, and my wife will be like, can we just watch a basketball game or something? I'll be like, nope, you got to hear this story. Great question, great point. And I'll summarize that in just a second, okay? Let me do it with this here. Let's talk about the cost of capital. Let's imagine that the cost of capital decreases. So when the cost of capital decreases, that means those machines that are used to drill the oil, right? Maybe they cost less to operate for whatever reason, right? So if that cost of capital decreases, now we have a lower, we'll put lower cost of production, right? So now it's cheaper to produce the same units that we did before, right? So kind of intuitively, if we're telling this story, this would mean that we should have an increase in supply. So there's two ways to think about this, kind of two directions we can go. We can say, for this given price, given output of Q1 again, before we were right here at point A, now we're going to be, say, down here, right? Just a little bit less in terms of the price. We don't have to charge as much to produce the same amount. Alternatively, we could produce more, but charge the same amount as before, which is going to put us on a point over here. So that would increase our supply, and we've got this right here. So we got S3 here. That's going to shift this to the right. Okay, so we're going to have an increase right here. Okay, so a couple questions come up here. So would an increase in the cost of labor cause the firm to raise the prices? Absolutely. That is exactly what's happening. Just like when the cost of capital decreases, that's going to lead to this reduction in the price that the firm's needing to charge in order to produce the amount that they were producing before. So again, we don't want to think of this as up and down. We want to think of this as a shift left and right. Okay, a shift left and right. Another question came up: would a change in the cost of human capital impact the supply of a good that doesn't use human capital in its production? So this is essentially thinking about the skilled workforce, right? How skilled is the workforce, and how much can someone produce in terms of their knowledge and their experience? So with that, that's a great question. There's actually whole classes. There's a journal of human capital economics, or journal of human capital, that actually addresses exactly these things. So again, the question is, would a change in the cost of human capital impact the supply of a good that doesn't use human capital in its production? So like, will education prices going up impact the price of coffee or something like that? And those two things are going to be, I think we're going to assume that they're unrelated or they're independent. That might not necessarily be the case in real life, though. But we're going to assume that we're not going to move those markets or kind of merge those markets together, at least right now. Other two questions that came up: if governments regulate the price, yes, I'll give more examples of capital in just a second. If governments regulated the price of capital and kept machinery at a low price, there will always be a lower cost of production. So that's an interesting point. Like, so if we take capital, say the cost of a machine, and say we're going to keep that price low, yes, that should filter down into lower prices for consumers. Now, what you have to keep in mind, though, and some of you guys may be saying that doesn't happen, that may not happen if the market is not competitive. If we don't have enough suppliers out there that are competing to get that market share of consumers. If you have any type of market power, you may just take that lower cost of production and just pocket that, not pass that on to the consumer. So if you're thinking that's the case, that very well may be the case. Yeah. So, and then if a demand for a product is high enough, would companies be more likely to supply more of a product at a low price? That's a real more detailed than it first seems, actually. It's a great question. So I'm gonna, if the demand for a product is high enough, would companies be more likely to supply more of a product at a low price? If the demand for a product is high enough, we're gonna see that actually will increase the price, but we'll see that when we put these two markets together. So we might come back to that question directly. Did you say investors would decrease wages? If so, is that because paying back investors would be another cost split between wages, overhead, profit? I don't really liken investors and wage changes to each other. I think of investors as more on the front side of firms, like putting together a building, buying a building, and then letting it be operated by somebody else. So keep those things at least separate for right now, but we may go back to it. These are fantastic questions, and I think this really highlights, I think a lot of folks and I want these questions to keep coming as you have them, because I think in like a big classroom setting like the university lecture hall, sometimes it's hard to get these questions out, but being able to type them out makes them really, really valuable. It's a really kind of I think it's a one like clear, unambiguous positive of being online. So keep those questions coming if you've got them. And I'm gonna, if I didn't address it well enough, just ask it again and we'll make sure I get to it. Okay, so what do we want to summarize here? So if something like labor, right, if the cost of labor goes up, or the cost of capital, right, and so we can summarize this. If the cost of inputs increase, right, don't memorize anything, just talk it out, just think it out. So if the cost of producing something goes up, that should decrease supply, right? That's going to decrease supply. That's going to shift that to the left, right? That goes left here, right? If the cost of inputs decrease, now it's cheaper to produce those goods and services. That should increase supply. But remember, we're thinking of this as a right or left shift, right? We're not thinking of this as up or down. We're thinking of it as right or left. So another question that came up was, can you give some more examples of capital? Capital is everything that isn't labor. That's what's kind of crazy about it. It's such an encompassing definition. So when you think about, I'm looking at a house right now. So what does it take to build a house? Well, I'm looking at like the roof tiles. That's something. I'm looking at like drywall. I'm looking at windows. I'm thinking about all the nails. I'm thinking about the hammer. I'm thinking about any type of machinery, a ladder, right? All of those things that were used, all of that aren't people, that were used to produce this house next door, or I suppose this one that I'm in, that's going to be part of our capital. If you're thinking about something like a farm, right, something like agriculture, you've got your workers, right? That's clear, that's clearly defined. But then you've got like a tractor, you've got the sod, you've got fertilizer, you've got seeds, you've got water, right? All of those things are going to be capital. So you can imagine in that example, if the price of water gets really, really expensive, well, now firms are going to have to charge a lot more for the same production as before if they've got to use water to produce their avocado plant, for example. Sorry about avocados. I'm just, you know my stance on avocados. Okay, so although there's a lot of competition in the medical field, why are prices still high? That is a great. I teach a health economics class at 8 o'clock in the morning. If you guys want the link to that on Tuesday and Thursday. And what really is at the heart of something like the medical field is that we don't. When you think about a hospital, is a hospital really competitive? Is a health emergency really like a competitive market? Like if you have an emergency, you call 911 and whatever price they charge you later, like you're not really even thinking about that. So when you think about the medical field, they actually have very little competition in terms of something like hospitals and treatment. But notice when you go to like Walgreens or something like that, there's generics for like Tylenol or Advil, for the ibuprofen, all these other markets, because that's where your competition is. So prices are high when there's not that competition. It's a great point, and actually kind of leads to not this next slide in particular, but as we kind of think about the different shifters of supply. I like this. Same with the DMV. Then they can make you wait as long as it takes because there's no competition for their service. Yeah, they actually it's like they wrap the cost into waiting in line. That makes me laugh. Monopoly of Epipens. It's almost, Lawrence, you actually are like, it's like you sat in on my class last week. Epipens have gone through a big increase in price, and they've had a lot of congressional the Congress has been alerted to them, and actually a competitor just came in for Epipens and took about half their market. So you'll see that happen as you kind of work, just seeing news headlines. But you guys had a ton of answers. It's not just cost of capital. There's a lot of things, and you guys are already kind of getting to the shifting of supply. What else shifts supply? All right, what else shifts supply? And what you're going to see is there's not an exhaustive list that we're going to be able to put on. There's essentially like this could go on forever. I just have something that's really kind of like out in left field, just to kind of give you guys a sense of how far out in left field we can go with this. If we're looking at land that has oil, so imagine that land exists with oil on it or oil underneath it, okay? But this land, say this is like in southern Utah, right, where there's a lot of national parks, a lot of cool features in the environment, right? And this land becomes a tourist attraction, okay? So that means that some landowners who might have been drilling before, right? They're sitting there saying like, gosh, there's people that are willing to pay to just come walk around here. It's like a park that they just want to just give me some cash for. So some landowners are saying, I'm going to stop drilling. Not that everybody's drilling on their own there, but work with me on this, right? They stop drilling. And so what I want you to think is that this is just like an out and left field example, but it really just is saying, so this would mean that the supply of oil or the supply of gasoline, right, the supply decreases because now there's this competing use of the land or of the resource. So that means we're going to shift it left, okay? And so again, just to drive this point home, this is meant to be a little redundant, right? But give yourself some practice and just tell a story along the way, right? I think just tell whatever story works for you, whether it's gasoline or whether it's something else. It doesn't matter what it is as long as it's consistent and somewhat generalizable, right? But if we say, look, this is the supply of gasoline, but now every place that drills for oil now can be a tourist destination. Certainly some people are going to say, yeah, I'm going to stop drilling for oil. I'm going to decrease my supply, right? I'm going to shift this thing left, okay? A lot of people have brought up technology. Technology we think of as kind of moving one direction, right? Technology kind of only is improving. We can think of technology as being, we would say, the same amount of capital leads to more production than before, right? That's how we can define this. So we could say we've got a certain number of machines. We could say we have 10 machines, and we compare those 10 machines to having 10 machines 50 years ago. The ones this year are more productive than the ones in the past because of technology. So that's going to give us this shift to the right. The other thing that came up, and this is I kicked this down the road for about 15 minutes, which is great, that it was so far in the past, and so essentially it was predicted, but it said, again, maybe too specific of a question, but how do government subsidies affect this curve? So government subsidies, gosh, what does that do? Right? Well, now that's giving firms money to produce more Q. That's going to, just in our mind, that will increase supply. So if we increase supply, what's that going to do? That will shift to the right, right? In the same way that technology will shift us to the right. So now we'd have a new curve that looks like this. We'd be at supply 3. We'd shift this thing to the right, okay? Lots of other things that I've got up there. We've got the number of producers. When I was saying that you guys were right on when you were talking about competition, this is it right here. As things become more competitive, if the market becomes more competitive, that's going to lead to more producers. If there's more producers, we're going to shift right. If you're concerned about a market that's buying up all of their competitors, what will less producers do? How can we show that? That will shift left. So what I want you guys to do, so some folks are really, they really like graphs. Some people don't like graphs. Some people really like a story. Some other people don't like a story. My goal is to have all those things kind of be together, right? And see kind of that movement between the two. So I do think there is some sort of, there's a natural way to kind of approach these things and say, okay, I think this should happen because I'm just thinking about this situation. I think firms should produce less. That should decrease supply. Then you can convert that to your graph, and then you can see what the outcome of that shift is. So a topic that's kind of tricky, I think, is future prices. So I'm going to ask you, question came up. Would electric car companies affect the supply the same way the tourist example does? No, that's a good question. So it would have to do with similar resources. So with an electric car company, remember, think about the trade-off here. The land that you're drilling for oil can become a tourist attraction. It's not that the land that you can drill for oil can become an electric car. It would be more that you would say, I have a plant, like I have a plant where I can produce a manufacturing plant. I can produce X or I can produce Y. So I can produce an electric car or a gas car. If that's your trade-off, doing one thing will affect the supply of the other thing. So they've got to be similar. The resource that you have has to be used for both goods you're interested in. So wouldn't more producers mean more competition and therefore a decrease in prices? You're definitely correct, and you're actually, I'm going to say, 3.5 steps ahead. Let's put it that way. Okay, let me ask you about future prices though, because future prices are tricky, and I want you guys to just kind of think about yourself from the producer standpoint. And I'll answer some of these questions as they're coming up. Okay. So, and actually, would derivatives pricing affect supply like a change in the price of futures contracts for crops? Let's find out. Right. We've got this right here. gasoline companies believe that next year the price of gas will be higher than it is today. Okay, which statement is the most correct about the market for gasoline? All right, so good question. Good to kind of get a break here. What do you guys think?
My lover's got humor. She's the giggle at a funeral. Knows everybody's disapproval. I should have worshipped her sooner. If the heavens ever did speak, she's the last true mouthpiece. Every Sunday's getting more bleak. A fresh poison each week. We were born sick, you heard them say it. My church offers no absolutes. She tells me worship in the bedroom. The only heaven I'll be sent to is when I'm alone with you. I was born sick, but I love it. Command me to be well. Amen. 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 Take me to church, I worship like a dog at the shrine of your light. I'll tell you my sins and you can sharpen your knife. Offer me that deathless death, the good God, let me give you my life. Take me to church, I worship like a dog at the shrine of your light. I'll tell you my sins and you can sharpen your knife. Offer me that deathless death, the good God, let me give you my life.
All right. Awesome. All right. All right. So everybody was dancing there, I think, or bobbing their head or something. Okay. Got some questions coming up, which is great. Okay. So future prices increase. Let's talk about how we want to address a question like this. And I'm going to get to this question just came up. What's the difference between increase in supply and increase in quantity supplied? Okay. So future prices increase. So what we think is that producing, or we'll say, let me go ahead and we'll say selling later, right? Selling tomorrow or the next day or next time period is more valuable. Right? This is more valuable than today, right? So if we can take this scenario and say that means that selling later is more valuable, that means selling today is not as valuable, right? So that means that we should produce less today, regardless of what that price is. So it's not just a single point, right? It's all points, right? Regardless of produce less today at all prices. Okay, so that means that we can take it let's see, we'll say last point, we can say this QS, right? Our quantity supplied will decrease at all P. Right, that's a way that we can convert this to a graph, right? So if you want to keep it simple, right, we'll just decrease S. So anything that's going to change our quantity supplied that's not today's price, this is future prices. So that's a big point here, right? Future prices are not, that's a weird tense thing, but are not P, right? That's not the price today. So that makes this a little funky and a little weird. So what did we get here? Right, we got a little bit of a split here, kind of all over the map here. So turns out it's going to be a decrease in the supply today, right? So a lot of people decrease in quantity supplied was I can see completely why you're there, and the spirit of answering that is not wrong at all. But what you have to remember is that we're right here, right? And we're here. You're taking a point. You're saying, look, we're at Q1 and P1, and then you find out that the prices are going to go up in the future. That means that you're going to say, well, if the prices are going to go up in the future, maybe I won't supply as much today. And that's where you're saying we should move over to here. And so that mindset is completely correct. But now you're saying, let's move over there and charge the same amount. Alternatively, right, and this I think makes more intuitive sense, you could produce the same amount, but just charge more today because that price is going to go up in the future. So if we have that movement, right? We've got S2, right? We've got S2 because we're on a brand new supply curve, okay? So we shift that supply left, okay? So the way a couple questions came up. What's the difference between increased supply, increased quantity supply, or can you explain the quantity supplied versus supply really quickly? Okay, so the idea, so prices, these P's are for prices right here that align with today's prices right there. Okay, okay, so can you explain supply versus quantity supply real quickly? Again, I want you to think of quantity supplied as a single point on the supply curve, right? So that's how I want you to approach that and try. So it's really tough. It's one of those things where repetition will help you out and make it seem more natural as time goes on. And I can completely understand how it gets backwards. But again, the way you can think about it is that if we want to know what happens to quantity supplied, right, that's just one movement, right, from here to here, right, say Q1 to Q2. But if we're doing it for all prices, then it's the entire supply curve, right? The entire supply curve is representing that. It's representing all the quantity supplied is the way to think about it. So again, future prices go up, selling later is more valuable. That's going to decrease supply. That's going to shift that to the left. So can it be a question just came up? So can it be a general rule that price just moves along the supply curve but does not change it, even if it's future price? That is exactly right. So the only way to move along the supply curve is to change price today. Okay. Future prices and everything else that could be part of the production process will shift supply. So is Q on the question, is Q on the x-axis quantity while any point on the line is quantity supplied? Yeah, so this is gonna, so I've been kind of dropping and adding these Q's and these D's on this horizontal axis. The reason for that is because we're going to combine these two graphs and we're going to just drop it completely and always have it be a Q. If you missed the top hat question, it's all good. It's all good. All right, so let's see. Anything else here? Let's see. This would be from the perspective of supplier. Yes. Does P mean future prices are not P? That's exactly right. Okay, I think we're good. I think we're good. Yes. Okay. So let's do that though, right? So this is good. I feel good about this. You guys have, I feel like moving along the supply curve real quickly is just going from, let's say, point A to point B. Okay. Just kind of pausing to make sure everybody's on the same page here. And I have iced coffee today. Real good stuff. Okay. All right. So let's move forward, right? Let's put this together because I think a lot of the questions that you guys have are going to be answered when we address market equilibrium. Okay, so let's talk about market equilibrium by combining our demand and supply. Okay, this will give us our equilibrium. So when I told some of you guys that you're a couple steps ahead, this is exactly where you were, and I was happy to know that a lot of people were there. Right. So what we're doing is we're analyzing a market where there's an interaction between consumers, right? Those are easy to think about. Those are like us buying things from firms, right? And this is happening in a marketplace, right? So what is a marketplace, right? We can think of a marketplace as simply a place where firms and consumers gather. Right, this is just a gathering of buyers and sellers. So, when I first started teaching this class, this example wasn't as relevant, but Amazon is like the ultimate marketplace, right? It's kind of taking products from sellers, putting them into a marketplace, and letting buyers come and buy them, right? It's the ultimate marketplace, and that's why so many people go there. It's like an e-Walmart, right? Is what it is. So and anybody can get into it within reason. So that's the kind of market that's what a marketplace is. And we can think of our goal is we want to find market equilibrium. And we're going to think of equilibrium in a lot of different ways in this class. And for the market, like the gasoline market, it will look very different than, say, the market for the economy. So what I want you guys thinking about kind of early here when we think about equilibrium is I want you to think about there being no pressure to change, right? So you can think about equilibrium as like equilibrium in life. Like if our life is in equilibrium, we don't feel this need to change or do anything different. Like everything is good, right? We don't talk like that very often. We don't say like, oh, I'm in equilibrium. But if you say, yeah, I'm all good, everything's fine, what you're essentially saying is things are in equilibrium. There's no pressure to change. So that would mean that when we find the equilibrium price, we have found the price such that there is no pressure to change. So the price has no pressure to change. And it's the same thing with the quantity. The equilibrium quantity will be the quantity such that there's no pressure to change. Right? So quantity then, equilibrium quantity has no pressure to change. Okay, no pressure to change, right? So those are just general ways to think about it. When we actually see it in practice, it's actually going to be a lot more straightforward. But I always want you to have this no pressure to change kind of in the back of your mind when we start going after this equilibrium idea. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take the information from the past couple days at this point and say, all right, well, let's combine our demand schedule and our supply schedule and have QD and QS, right? And we'll have the different prices. All right, so we've got our line here. We've got our line here of prices, right? And we've got our quantity supplied. So I'm going to start at $1. $1 right here. Then $1.50, $2, $2.50, $3, erase that, $3.50, and $4. Okay, so and it goes all the way to $4.50 there. Okay, so we've got our prices there, and then this is just borrowing from the past lecture, right? So you guys, I didn't need to bring it back up again. We've got it right here. When the price is $1, the quantity demanded is 20, then 18, then 16, then 14. 12, 10, 8, 6. Okay. Quantity supplied, like we saw a little bit earlier, we had those zeros when the price is too low. So hopefully that's making a little bit more sense than it did when it first came up. Like, yeah, that's okay. So the price isn't high enough. Firms aren't going to produce. They're not going to dig for oil or gasoline. When that price starts to go up, it goes to 4 gallons, and then 8, then 12, 16, 20, and 24. So if you're sitting there, and obviously I've got the equilibrium highlighted, but if you're sitting there saying, so the equilibrium is just looking at the quantity demanded and quantity supplied, finding when they're equal, and then having that be the price, is it that straightforward? It is. It is that straightforward. It's not meant to be confusing. It's not meant to throw you off track. It's meant to just say, look, at a price of $3, there's going to be 12 gallons that people want to buy, and there's going to be 12 gallons that firms want to sell. That's it. That's our equilibrium, right? So you don't have to overcomplicate it. You don't have to think kind of beyond that. Knowing that what's underneath it, why the demand curve looks the way it does, and the supply curve looks the way it does, it's where they're equal, right? So we would say that our equilibrium is at a price of $3, right? At a price of $3, quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. So that means that our equilibrium price is $3. This is equal to $3. And our equilibrium quantity is 12. All right. So question came up. So equilibrium is when consumers and suppliers agree on a price. Even more so, think of it as there being no pressure to change. There's no pressure to change the price or the amount that's being produced or bought or sold, right, at this equilibrium price and quantity. So let's take this idea, this whole table here, right? And you guys probably, if you're taking notes, you probably have a little bit more space than me. I've got to go ahead and copy and paste this, which I can do to the next page. Let's show this visually. So I'm going to have that table come right back up here, right? Let's show this visually, right, and graph that demand and that supply curve on the same graph, right? So I'm going to be a little loose with this. It doesn't need to be drawn completely to scale or anything like that, but I've got a supply curve that starts essentially at $2, looks like this, and I've got a demand curve that goes all the way up there, and we've got demand that looks like this. All right, and again, take those wins when you can get them. If you're again sitting there saying, so is equilibrium just where the price equals, like the supply equals demand, where this intersection occurs? Yep, that's it. Like, don't overcomplicate it. You don't need to overcomplicate it. But what I want you to do, if you're feeling comfortable with that, what I want you to do is I want you to push on why that exactly would be the equilibrium. So the way that we're going to push on that is we're going to say, let's imagine, right, instead of being at this point right here, which we'll eventually call E, let's imagine that we're at price high, right? Let's imagine that we're not in equilibrium. Let's imagine that the price is $4 right here. So let's imagine that price high equals $4. So what's going on when that price is $4? Well, we've got this quantity supplied. We've got firms. We'll put Q4 right here. This is equal to 20, right? I can just go straight to that table and say, yeah, the firms are going to be producing 20 units. So QS equals 20. Over here, right, we'll put, bear with me here. I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to do QS high. And I'm going to put QD high, right? So the quantity demanded at this high price, we can just look at the table and say that's only 8, right? So firms are producing 20 units, but consumers are only buying 8. So what would we define this as? Well, we've got too much production, not enough buying. We've got a surplus. We've got excess supply. We've got a surplus. How much is that surplus? Well, it's just QS minus QD. This is equal to 20 minus 8. This is equal to 12. So there's essentially 12 gallons of gasoline left over. So if you're a firm, you're sitting here looking at this saying, like, I'm producing 20 units. I've got 12 left over. The price is $4. Why don't I just reduce my price? And then if I reduce my price, that surplus will start to go down. People will start to move into the market and buy more. We'll start to converge to this point right here. So there is pressure to decrease price. So it can't be an equilibrium because that feels that pressure. It feels those leftover goods and services essentially. So they're gonna respond to that, right, by decreasing that price when it's too high. Similarly, right, let's go to price low. Let's say that the price is only $2, right? So the price is only $2. So let's imagine we're at price low equal to $2. So in this case, well, what's our quantity supplied? Our quantity supplied at this low point, right, and I can put this in red here, is going to be 4, right? It's relatively small here. There's not a lot of production from the firm's side. So there's only 4 gallons being produced, but because that price is so low, right, consumers are like, this is great, right? $2 per gallon. So my quantity demanded at this low price, this is going to be 16 units, right? So we've got a quantity supplied equal to 4, and we've got a quantity demanded equal to 16. So now, instead of a surplus, right, we've got people lined about the door and there's not enough gasoline to go around, we've got a shortage, right? We've got a shortage. So the shortage of gasoline, we can actually define this, right? The shortage is going to be the amount that consumers want to buy minus the amount that producers are making. This is 16 minus 4. This just coincidentally happens to be 12. That wasn't what it was meant to be, right? But in this case, we've just got the same size shortage. But if we put ourselves in the position of the consumers and the producers and say, okay, people are lined about the door to get my product, my price is pretty low, I could just go ahead and raise my product, or price of my product, right? I'll produce more as a result. I'll be willing to produce more. People won't, the line will get shorter out the door, but eventually will converge on this equilibrium price. So that means that there is this pressure to increase price. But ultimately, what it means is that we're moving towards what I'm just going to call P1, which is going to be, well, go ahead and call it PE, for price equilibrium. All right, that's what this is. We're converging and moving, and we have pressure up until this $3 point, where at this point, we'll call it QE and PE equal to 12. And I'll put this in a different color. I'll put it in green for good and go, right? At a price equal to $3, there is no pressure to change the price. Why is that the case? Because quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied. There is no shortage, there is no surplus. So when we have this surplus, right, we have this excess supply, right, because there's too much being produced. When there's a shortage, right, we're not producing enough, right? But those things push those prices towards that equilibrium price when there's no pressure to change. So a question came up, could we also just do QS minus QD for each scenario and know that a negative value would mean there's a shortage? Yes, however you want to work with this will be, if it works for you, it works for me. The one thing you just need to remember is that if that price is too low, you're going to have a shortage. If the price is too high, you're going to have a surplus. And that's all you've got to remember on that front. How come the area of the triangle between the surplus shortage isn't counted as a surplus or shortage? Because we're just looking at a snapshot in time. So we're just saying like that particular price level, that difference there between those two lines in terms of quantity, that's the size of our shortage or our surplus. Okay, so this is great. This question actually segues into exactly what we're going to do for the rest of today. And that's similar to quantity supplied, demand, supply curves, all that stuff. Are there factors that can change equilibrium? That's it. That's why we're here. That's how all of this coming together. So we've isolated demand, we've isolated supply. Now we've put all these together. What's great though is that all this particular slide is a mess. And it's a mess on purpose because there's just so much going on. I'm kind of like saying, hey, look at all this equilibrium, look at this movement towards E. Moving forward, we don't need to do that. All we need to do is just say, let's just draw, if we want to put ourselves in equilibrium, and let's go back to our goal, right? And this is going to segue into a top hat question and the question that was just asked. Our goal, remember, is to explain gas price fluctuations, right? That's what we want to do. So let's start with equilibrium in the gas market. Right, equilibrium in the gasoline market. Okay, so, and this is just a strategy to approach these questions. I'm going to ask you a question about a change in the equilibrium of a market. Get that market into supply and demand. Right, say, okay, I don't know anything about the question, But I do know that if we're dealing with the market, we're going to start at P1 and we're going to start at Q1. And let's go ahead and just call that equilibrium point E, right? That's nice and clean, right? There's not all this stuff going on like in the previous slide. That was just such a mess. We can simplify it. That's kind of the point here, okay? Is get all that stuff kind of worked out, all that difficult stuff worked out, and then get back to the simple part of the model, right? That's the novelty or the strength of this. So to Mark's question, I believe it was Mark that just asked that about can we change the equilibrium? So here it is. So let's do something that's really pertinent. This was more pertinent when the lockdown was in March, but it's still relevant today. Let's imagine we have a really strict lockdown for 30 days and we only have essential travel. What's the most likely thing that's going to occur with regards to the gasoline market? So there's a lot of things going on here, but let's talk about what happens when there is a 30-day lockdown on travel. Let's go ahead and do this. Let's go ahead and do this. So here we go.
If I had $1 million,
if I had $1 million,
well, I'd buy you a house.
I would buy you a house.
And if I had $1 million,
if I had $1 million,
buy you furniture for your house.
maybe a nice Chesterfield or an ottoman.
And if I had $1 million,
If I had $1 million,
well, I'd buy you a K car.
a nice Reliant automobile.
And if I had $1 million, I'd buy your
You guys are thinking about $1 million. Yep. That's such a goofy song, but it's kind of nice. Okay, so before you even like look at the answers, right? You want to think about what can happen as a result of this travel lockdown in terms of the gasoline market, like going to the gas station, right? And so this is all about people not getting into their cars, right, and not really going anywhere. And if you remember back in March and April, what that really means is that we're gonna reduce that demand for gasoline, right? And so if we can just convert all of this into decrease the demand for gasoline, right? We've got the story. We know what happens in terms of our graph. Now we've just got to show that this is a shift left, and then we can go ahead and say, well, what's going to happen to that price and that quantity? So let's shift that demand left, and I'm going to do this in a different color because it's getting more relevant here. So we go from S1 to S2, shift that there. We go from E1 to E2. Let the graph, once you get that graph once you start moving it, let that graph guide your answer, right? Let it guide your answer. Because now we're here at Q2, we've reduced quantity, but now we've got a higher price. Oh my gosh, you guys should have stopped me. Going the wrong way. Wrong one. Stop myself. Wrong curve. Don't ever do that. It's worth like $1 million points, $1 million. Sorry. There we go. My bad. Okay. I had the quantity right, not the price, and that was like in my head. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense, and I stopped myself. Okay, so I will tell you that was on purpose. Okay, sorry about that. So we go from Q1 to Q2. We see that reduction in quantity. So yeah, you kind of notice. Question, wait, he's shifting supply, not demand. No, we're shifting demand. My bad. So we shift demand to the left, right? We reduce that quantity and we reduce that price. So What did you guys all say? All right, we're kind of split here, right? But we got the equilibrium quantity and price of gasoline will decrease. So you guys, for the most part, had it. That was the majority, the highest correct answer, was that. So that's good. So what we do here, like I said, we tell our story, right? We convert that story to something having to do with demand or supply, right? And then we say, okay, well, which direction does that go? Make sure you shift the correct curve, right? So we shift demand left. We go from D1 to D2. We have a new equilibrium. We go from E1 to E2. So prices go down, quantity goes down, okay? So a good question. I think it's funny because as I was asking this question, would the supply curve also shift left? This is a really important point. So with this 30-day lockdown, right, this doesn't have anything to, this doesn't say anything about the production process of the oil company or the gasoline company. So that's a good point. And that is actually, in all honesty, that's why I was pausing, because I was thinking about that the entire question. So that's why I said people do not travel. I'll make sure that nothing's that ambiguous moving forward, though. Okay, for a company, where would they want the equilibrium to be, and where would they want it to keep shifting? This is an interesting point. This has got a long-term answer to it, right? But in this case, if the demand goes down, the firm is maximizing profit at E2. That's them saying, look, at this price and this quantity, we are maximizing profit. So they're doing as good as they can given that demand curve. That's a really important point. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to ask one more question, because this is just one way we can explain a fluctuation. If price and quantity go down, it certainly seems like that could come because we have this reduction in demand, right? So that's actually kind of a nice way to classify all of these shifts. And I'm going to encourage you to look for examples that are going to show that, say, an increase in demand or a decrease in supply. But I want to make sure we get one more thing in, right? And that's going to be one more question. Okay. So one final question. I want to start in equilibrium in the gasoline market. But what happened at the same time that this lockdown occurred, so that was kind of where I was mixing up supply and demand here, kind of had both those things in my mind, is because this question is largely going to address that. During March, Saudi Arabia, where we get a lot of our oil, they increased oil production by 20%. Okay, so I want to know what happened to the gas market when we had this influx of oil, right? When we had this big influx of oil. So let's give this a try, put ourselves in equilibrium, right, and see what we get here. Okay.
Riding along in my automobile, my baby beside me at the wheel. I stole a kiss at the turn of a mile, my curiosity running wild, cruising and playing the radio with no particular place to go. Riding along in my automobile, I was anxious to tell her the way I feel. So I told her softly and sincere, and she leaned and whispered in my ear, cuddling more and driving slow, with no particular place to go.
All right, gonna let this go just for the sake of time. Let this run out. Okay, and let's see what we get here, right? So we've got cheaper oil. This is gonna decrease our cost of production, right? This is a lower cost of production. So what is this going to do? Well, this should lead to an increase in supply. So when we're thinking about that lockdown's pushing this demand to the left, but then we've got this increase in supply, and this happened in March during the lockdown. We went from supply 1 to supply 2. So what happened to that price? If that was the only thing that occurred, right? We start at E1 and then we go to E2. So we go to Q2 and P2. So we should see the price go down and our quantity go down. So is that what we said? This is great. So the thing I'll leave you with is that you guys are getting this. We're going to practice it more and more. We're going to put these two things together at the start of class on Thursday. But we also need to have some evidence of this. And so we're going to start looking at data that's going to support this or refute this just basic idea of oh, sorry, thank you. Quantity's going up. Gosh, I am like off on it today. That means we got to call it a day. And then, yeah, that's good. Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. I was reading it right on your guys' answers, so you got it right. We're all good. That means we've got to call it a day, though. I guess I'm out of it. But this is, you guys have the right idea. I'm confident that you guys can move forward with this. Let's call it a day. Let's see you guys on Thursday. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for bearing with the mistakes.
We're no strangers to love. You know the rules, and so do I. I feel commitment's what I'm thinking of. You wouldn't get this from any other guy. I just wanna tell you how I'm feeling. Gotta make you understand. Never gonna give you up. Never gonna let you down. Never gonna run around and desert you. Never gonna make you cry. Never gonna say goodbye. Never gonna tell a lie and hurt you. We've known each other for so long. Your heart's been aching, but you're too shy to say it. Inside we both know what's been going on. We know the game and we're gonna play it. And if you ask me how I'm feeling, don't tell me you're too blind to see. Never gonna give you up. Never gonna let you down. Never gonna run around and desert you. Never gonna make you cry. Never gonna say goodbye. Never gonna tell a lie and hurt you. Never gonna give you up. Never gonna let you down. Never gonna run around and desert you. Never gonna make you cry. Never gonna say goodbye. Never gonna tell a lie and hurt you. Never gonna give, never gonna give. Never gonna give, never gonna give. We've known each other for so long. Your heart's been aching, but you're too shy to say it. Inside we both know what's been going on. We know the game and we're gonna play it. I just wanna tell you how I'm feeling. Gotta make you understand. Never gonna give you up. Never gonna let you down. Never gonna run around and desert you. Never gonna make you cry. Never gonna say goodbye. Never gonna tell a lie and hurt you. Never gonna give you up. Never gonna let you down. Never gonna run around and desert you. Never gonna make you cry. Never gonna say goodbye. Never gonna tell a lie and hurt you. Never gonna give you up. Never gonna let you down. Never gonna run around and desert you.
All right, just gonna answer your question, Alex, live here. We're not going to look at the supply-demand models in terms of places like China. There's actually some great classes on that, though. Some of our best faculty teach these great classes on this comparative economic politics and political economy. So definitely check those out. It's really great stuff. So definitely.